First of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I am excited to share my passion and my love of story with your audience.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started into this episode.
I am a creative producer, a story development sort of nerd, you could say. I guess that has been my obsession, that has been my passion for a long time. I've spent years in development and as a writer as well as a screenwriter. And also 10 of those years, so the last 10 years, I've been teaching screenwriting and as a lecturer for doing workshops, seminars, and I've been fortunate to do it in many places. So I actually I'm Canadian originally, but I lived abroad for 21 years. So I have been living in Dubai, UAE for 21 years. And the last 5 years of that, I was sort of back and forth between Thailand and Dubai. I would spend on average about 6 months a year in Thailand and then 6 months back in Dubai because my husband was in Dubai, and so back and forth, family responsibilities. And while I was in Thailand, I was working, so I've been developing an independent project. And something through these years, something was birthed in a sense out of my struggle personally and my, I guess you could say, I'm not gonna say failure. I'm gonna say learning opportunity.
Yeah. Life is up and down, so we keep moving.
Yeah, exactly. So it was, I sort of stepped out to do this move, which was to go off and to write an animated script. So this was my dream, was to this, and I had this project for several years, and it was in development, and it was the project that we had seen incredible response to and just like movement with. And my husband and I sort of knew that we have something here. We have something here that has great potential, not just as a story, but also as a business in terms of its marketing potential, its merchandising, all that kind of stuff. And so I set off to go and write this, and little did I know that it was going to be, even though I'd written plays before and I'd written short scripts and I'd written stuff that I had also received a lot of feedback on my ability to write, and that I was pretty good, and I had my little bit of success in that area, and so it had given me enough confidence to go off and to write on my own. And when I arrived in Thailand and I began, I within a few months I realized, okay, I need a writing team, and I've got to put together a group of people. There was about four in total, and we had a development. So we were doing story development, and I was working with this team. And every time I would get together with the team, there would be so much energy, and it was just so exciting. And I was at the top of my game. Like, this was the ultimate, sort of, this is my happy place, was working within a team environment. And then every time I sort of got into this area where I was like, okay, enough development now, time to sit down and write, it would just become this torturous process. And it was just, it was like staring at that blank page, no ideas flowing, and I couldn't understand why it was so difficult in terms of, like, I know what I have to do, just need to sit down and do it, right? So why is there an obstacle in my path? And this kept happening over and over. And so again, after a year or two, I put together another team. And so over the course of these years, I actually had about 3 teams that I put together. And my point is, out of all of this, what I realized was that there is something that we are not taught as writers. There's something that is not even. I don't believe that the awareness is there that this is the nature of writers, but I then spent a lot of time researching this, trying to understand, like, is this only me, right? And speaking to a lot of other writers, trying to understand if they are going through a similar thing. What I came to realize was that there are collaborative writers and there are solo writers, just like there are collaborative artists and there are solo artists, right? So in every discipline of art, where you have in music, if you look at music, you have artists who are solo artists who prefer to sing alone, and those who desire to form a band, right? And work together in a group. Even not just in artistic fields, right? You have, like, look at art in the world of athletics and sports. So there are those athletes who prefer to be solo athletes, like runners, and sort of like, like, look at the Olympics. Half of them are skiers and snowboarders and all these. There's a lot of solo athletic sports out there, and then there's team sports, right? The ones who prefer to be part of a team. So the nature of human beings is to be what we're kind of solo or collaborative. And when I realized that this was what the case was, I was just like, it was incredibly devastating on one hand, because I feel like we had stepped out with this great hope to do this, and although I finished with a lot of pain,
But you have the satisfaction as you're back on it, see all the different facets of it, actually, the different challenges that are on the way.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Now I think that something valuable came out of that. It took about a year, because we moved to Vancouver recently, and well, it's been about 10 months or so. So we moved here, and it has been a process of sort of sifting through the experiences in Thailand and understanding. And what came out of that was this writer's room experience. So it's basically what I was doing with my team day in and day out, every time we met, and sort of it's put together as a 4-hour workshop. And the whole idea is that this is an opportunity for people to know themselves, for writers to know themselves. And it is, and the whole the importance there is that the objective or the aim is really just to hopefully save someone years of struggling, trying to understand and trying to figure out why they can't do this, right? Like, the whole idea is nobody sets off to write something if they don't already know that they can write, and they haven't had feedback. So most writers along the way, they've had the feedback, they know that they can write, they know they have a talent there. The problem is that when they set off to write alone, it becomes such a painful process that many of them give up along the way. And this is the problem that, and yet there are paths. So for those people, like, now I've had people come to, attend these workshops, and they hate this process, and they find that it is slow, and it is frustrating, and they just don't like the idea of having to sit there and wait for other people's and their ideas, and and that's okay. That just confirms that they are not they're not cut out for that. That they should be solo writers, and and they prefer to create on their own. They prefer to do the creative process and the writing itself on their own, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. Then they know that there are tracks for that. So there are avenues for example, novelists, playwrights, even screenwriters for film. So there's so many outlets, and journalism is another one. So if you're a solo writer, then okay, it's understanding that there are tracks that are suitable for you. But if you're collaborative, if you attend the workshop, for example, and you realize that this is where you thrive, and oh my gosh, I've never worked with other writers before, and this is such an incredible process, then you end up realizing that there are specific tracks for that too. So television writing, for example, happens in team environments. Animation writing happens in team environments. You know, and even if you just partner up with another person, you can still, but you're like, for example, if your passion is film, writing for feature length films, you can partner with another person and that's a writing team, you know, and just one other person. Often for a collaborative person, all you need is one other person, um, and your ideas will start flowing, and you know you'll come to life. You will have uh, all of the obstacles that you face in terms of facing that blank page, and you know that difficulty in sort of engaging your creative capacities, your faculties. All of that will completely, you know, will be so easy when you have a writing partner. But often people don't know, and you know, I often tell people that which is you know very much the truth, that when you have for every one writer who reaches a writer's room in television, for example, right, or in animation, for every writer that reaches a writer's room, 10 have already given up along the way, you know, and that's the sad truth. And so the objective with this workshop is really just to be able to help writers at an early stage. Like I'm looking at, you know, this is something that I'm really passionate about doing in university environments. So right now, most of these workshops have been sort of open to writers of all ages.
How do you see the people that are working with you? What do they feel about this this process of writing? Because I look at it as a kind of a deep work, because you are going to have to research, you are going to write. Of course, it depends on what you are writing, whether you are writing a fictional writing or a research or a paper. So, of course, in any case, there is a lot of work that goes into it. So, the people that you are working with, what do you see them say about their writing process?
Well, most of the writers I work with are all in fiction, first of all, right? So, because nonfiction is a different arena a little bit, and it's still, even in fiction, there's a lot of research. So the process is similar in that regard, but the approach is different, right? And also I would say your the process is largely the same. I guess you're still writing for your audience, so you still have to know who it is you're writing for at the end, right? And the difference with, I would say, with fiction is that you really want to be able, you know, genre is the most important thing in fiction, and understanding that as a writer, you have an obligation really to meet those genre conventions and to write to an expectation for your audience, you know. And writing can be great, it can be therapeutic, but it's not about writing for us, right? If you're writing for an audience, then you're really trying to write for what they need, what they're expecting to see when they come. For example, most of my area has been in screenwriting, so it's, you know, about film and television series. But again, I've also worked with, you know, I've had people in my classes who are interested in novels or in playwriting. Um, but again, I would probably draw the line and say that there's different things that you're addressing in nonfiction than you are in fiction. Um, in fiction, the process is, it really starts with, I think, what do you want to say? Why do you want to tell this story? Why is it important to you to tell this story? And I think that when a person is not connected to their material on a personal level, it's going to become incredibly difficult because it's a very long process. And it will be very difficult to maintain the enthusiasm for it and maintain the drive really to finish the project if you're not fully, uh, you know, if you're not really connected with that on some kind of a personal level, right? And passionate to tell that story. Um, the next step would be identifying the theme. It's really getting a clear idea of what is it that you want to say. What is the message in a sense, right here? Um, and when you have a clear idea of what you want to say, now there's different opinions on this. Some writers say, you know, just start writing. and you'll be able to find your theme along
Yeah,
the
we'll
way.
edit it later.
Yeah, right. And that's there's different ways. There's always different approaches, right? Everybody is different, and how they approach writing is completely different. But there's certain myself, I definitely approach it with theme first. So, and what is this about, right? And of course, it will change a little bit as you're doing development and as you're exploring the world deeper and as you're building your characters. Then I think the whole. I don't think that it changes completely. I think that it deepens the message, right? And that you end up becoming you reach this point where you're able to infuse it with a lot more depth and meaning, right? But it has to start from someplace. It has to have a starting point that is which kind of gives you like boundaries, which is really important. You need creative limitations, they're called, because without that, we would be lost. Like it's overwhelming. Too much choice or too much freedom sometimes ends up, taking us and one, it can and you end up taking you on so many little rabbit trails away from your story. Two, also, it can actually be too stifling. So think about, for example, when you go into a restaurant and you open a menu and there's, 100 different choices, right? 100 different options. And you're just like, you're so overwhelmed by the choice. Like, what is this? Meanwhile, you go into a restaurant. Like, I don't know about you, but personally, I prefer to go to a
Certainly.
restaurant and have, like, plus it also gives me that kind of, what do you call it? The reassurance or the confidence that, okay, if they make only 20 things in this restaurant, they must be good at these 20 things, right? Like not, not doing, like 100 different menu items and what's, it's like a crapshoot. So, so in the same way, we need limitations as well. And so I would say, the starting point is a theme. Second to that is the philosophical conflict in your story. So, what is the sort of moral, ethical dilemma that you are building into your story? And that's really important, actually, because, and I don't know if people really realize how necessary that is. I think that there's, and really what the defining factor is, the differentiating factor between a good film, for example, and a great film. It doesn't matter how much special effects you have and how much uh, you know you could have the best cast and you all the bells and whistles, right, in a story and the biggest budget, but if it isn't meaningful for your audience and it doesn't present them with hard choices. It doesn't present your characters with hard choices. Then your audience is going to be, I mean, they could be entertained on one level, but I don't think it'll never move them at an emotional level.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
yeah, so philosophical conflict is incredibly important. And I think so yeah, so I would say theme, philosophical conflict. So get these big sort of stones in place, right? Get the big an understanding of what your story is, and then it's genre. So which genre best serves to deliver this message or to explore this topic? And once you have these three major things in place, right? Because the genre is critical for the success of a film as well. Um, Once you have these three things in place, then you begin research, and it takes a lot of research to be able to pull that together, and make that world rich. So, for example, if it's not just fantasy, I have so much respect for fantasy. Ironically, I was not a big fan of fantasy as a genre until I began working on this animated project, and I realized how much work goes into building a world. And so now I have a completely different perspective on on fantasy, and I have so much respect for it as a genre. But even apart from that, it doesn't have to be animation or fantasy. Every genre and anything you write requires a certain level of research.
Yeah, just for the curiosity, do you also do some animation or something like that? Because the other day I interviewed a visual artist in Canada. Of course, we did a lot about talking a lot about this. So just for the curiosity, do you also do animation?
Me personally, no, I wish. I'm not talented in that area, unfortunately.
Okay,
I
okay.
am just I'm a writer. I'm on the writing side, so and the story development. So
Uh,
yeah.
all right, cool. Now, tell me, how did you get started in writing? I'm interested in that story. Help me understand that. At what
Yeah.
age did you start to write?
Uh this is gonna sound strange, but I was quite late in my life where I kind of realized that I had this ability to write. And it was about 35. Um, it came in a roundabout way. So I, I actually, well, I studied film and television production when I was in university. This has always been my passion. I believed I wanted to be a director. This was my, a film director. This was my dream. But I realized when I got into the real world that directing is a very technical field. The understanding of lighting and cameras and all the technical aspects that really make a film. And the thing is, it's continuously changing too, right?
Mhm.
So, and I'm technically challenged, so that was, very quickly it became a non-option for me. But I understood over time that it was storytelling in general. That is my passion. That has always been my, what's interested me. And but I had a little bit of a detour. So I worked for a year in a in a film production company when I graduated from university in Toronto, and then I moved to Dubai, and a year and a half later, roughly, and that was just supposed to be for a year. It was just supposed to be. A little adventure, get some work experience, wanting to go abroad. But I met my husband the first day I
Oh,
landed
that's
in
a good
Dubai.
story. That's a good
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, I met him the first day I landed in Dubai, and so it changed the trajectory of my of my path significantly.
That's a good one.
um, yes. So although I say like personally it was the best decision I made, but it was career suicide on the other side, unfortunately. So I ended up because there was no this is Dubai before Dubai we know today, right? Like there was no there was no industry, there was no media city. I think that was the very beginning of when they had set up the media city there. And and I sort of worked I had a job in a production company lined up. So I went from the airport straight to the production company and I was working there, but or sorry, that's how we met in the company. And but it was a lot of sort of it's a service industry, right? And they were doing a lot of like TV commercials and this kind of stuff. And I was in corporate videos and I was really, like I wanted to be doing creative stuff, and I wanted to be working in story and this was just not an option. I also don't speak, read or write Arabic, unfortunately. So that was, I was kind of locked out of the market in that sense. Anyway, so it ended up causing a detour and I ended up in corporate marketing. Don't ask me how that happened. But I found myself a couple years, later in corporate marketing, and I sort of worked my way up from the bottom. And about 7 years I spent doing that, which during the process was, quite torturous. But and I really didn't enjoy the day to day. But looking back in hindsight, I came to understand the value of it later, I guess is what I'm going to say. So I think I reached the point my last job in marketing was with a multinational. So I, worked my way up. Like I said, it was with Visa International. And, but again, financial services and, just the whole, by the time I got here, I was probably 2 years away from management. And I was at that crossroads in my career where it was like to rise up into management, you really need an MBA. And it was a point where I was trying to make this decision about whether or not I do this? Do I stop? Do I do an MBA in order to continue on and grow in marketing? Or do I leave now? Because, once upon a time I had this dream, and it was haunting me. And And I decided that, okay, enough is enough. I'm not going to continue on because the thing with the corporate world is that it is, they call the trappings of the corporate world, which is very true. In Dubai at that time, it was just the beginning of the boom, like 2004, 2005, 2006, right? And
But in terms of the working environment, in terms of the creative work that you were doing there, how was it for you? Okay, you were trying to climb the ladder, no? It's something that you have always dreamed of. But looking at behind that, looking at the creative process itself, how was it for you in Dubai?
oh, interesting. Okay. The Well, okay, once I left marketing and I started my own independent projects. So I came to back to film as a producer now. This was my uh in terms of, because I learned so much from the corporate world about business. And I was able to come back to the film industry, but from a business point of view now. Like now suddenly I had this perspective that I didn't have, and I probably would not have had if I had stayed in Canada and worked sort of through production, which most people end up doing, right? Um, in Dubai, the creative process, so marketing is creative to some degree, but again, it's so much about driving profit, and it's so much about, especially at that time, I think that now the rhetoric has changed a lot, and the conversation seems to be around adding value. It's changed significantly. In my day, this was all about, profit. It was a profit mandate. That's all that seemed to drive
Yeah, I
everything
believe
we
it's still
did.
today.
What's that?
No, I mean, I believe today the profit is still driving the
It's
industry.
still driving it. It's still driving it, but it's. I just think that they're not so blatant about it. I think this whole idea, they mask it with this whole concept of, like, we're
Mhm.
adding value and we're helping people and solving problems, and so at least it sounds a little bit, not as ruthless, right?
That is just a mask.
Yeah, it's just a mask, exactly. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I actually, my very first project like a humanitarian project. So I think it was just like a knee-jerk reaction from
Mhm.
from the corporate world, um and it was this campaign that we had built. So that was a really creative process, putting that together and working with the team. And again, I always loved collaborating, pulling a team of people together. And so working independently was very creative. I think where I struggled, I did a lot of freelance work over the years here and there, but again, those were TV commercials, corporate videos, and I tried my best to shy away from it, actually, because I had spent those years working in marketing, and I was like, I'm not doing that again, But it was so the creative pursuit, I really had to be independent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I hope that's answering your question. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
yeah, that because it's such a corporate city and everything was focused around business there, to do anything truly creative, we had to do that independently.
So if you were to say you take something away from Dubai then to Canada, I'm looking at it from the point of view of fanatics of a creator now, because of course that is a huge part of what we are talking about here: storytelling and looking at content creators and things like that. So I'm looking at what would you say you take away there as a form of what we'll call it an experience, a working experience that you went away to Canada with from Dubai.
Good question. Okay. I would say, well, how do I say this diplomatically? Let's just say that working in Dubai really opened my eyes to the way the world works. Coming coming to Dubai from Canada, I was only 23 at the time, and I was so naive. And unfortunately, this is actually the case, I would say, with most Canadians were really sheltered here in terms of, and it really is, coming back now after such a long time. And, my husband and I, we've had conversations about this, and it's like, it's a very, uh, I'm not going to say 100% because there's no such thing as 100%, but in large part, it is the like business ethics are very high in this country. And there's so much transparency in business. there is, the standards, the ethical standards are so high. And so, corruption is very low and it's not tolerated in this environment. And I think that living and working in Dubai, and not only Dubai, like in Thailand as well, you know, my exposure to the level of corruption that exists in business, in most of the world, the Middle East, in all of these places in Asia, was such an eye-opening experience to me, and it was something that was not only a huge learning curve, um, on one hand, but it has also kind of made me a little paranoid, right? So I've come back to Canada into a very ethical sort of environment, and I'm kind of like, everything to me is like, I don't know, so I'm a lot more skeptical than I ever was, I think, of, and how people are doing business. But I had to be reminded of the fact that, okay, I've actually done a little bit of research on this, and I think that statistically we are in one of the top, I think, 5 countries in the world. So the only other countries that are probably at the same level are the Scandinavian countries, so Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and I think the Netherlands. No, the Netherlands is not on the list, but there was, and then in Canada. So we're just like a handful of countries. The U.S. is definitely not on this list.
And why?
Yeah, so I think that it's good in one way that we still have these standards here, but it also puts Canadians in a kind of a vulnerable position, because dealing with and doing business with other parts of the world, we're not aware here of the way a lot of business is done in other parts of the world, and I think that more and more, the world is becoming connected a lot faster than we're all kind of struggling to keep up with all this, and it's just continuous learning, which is great. But I think that that's what I would say. Like, so when I meet people here, and I've met friends here, and we talked about that, it's like there's just be ultra vigilant and aware of the fact that the rest of the world is, and not to sorry, not to sound like an us and them kind of situation, right? I'm not trying to say Canadians are better. This is not my point. If anything, I'm saying we're very naive, in comparison, because for so long we've just been kind of in this closed off shell and only really interacting with America. That was for the longest time.
All right, because you did make mention of storytelling a lot.
Yeah.
I want you to give me a description. How do you define, because that is part of what you do most of the time. How do you describe storytelling for somebody who do not know?
Okay. Well, storytelling story in and of itself is really, it's an emotional journey. This is what you're taking your audience on. And a good story delivers on that promise. And so it is really about allowing your audience, let me put it this way, allowing your audience to experience emotions that they want to experience in the safest possible environment. So think about, for example, people who, go into a theater to watch a horror film, right? Or at home. And I mean, personally, I'm not a huge fan of horror. I was when I was a kid, but now I just think, oh gosh, I wouldn't want to put myself through that. But what they're really wanting is they want that adrenaline rush. They want that tension and that that fear to be evoked, but knowing that they're going to walk out of this after an hour and a half, 2 hours, and they're safe. You know what I mean? Because to be alive as a human being, it is to experience the full range of emotions, right? And even fear, to be able to dip into our deepest, darkest fears and come out of it safely. It's these are the things that keep us alive. I mean, why do people do extreme sports, for example, right? Why do they put themselves in these positions where they are cliff diving or scuba diving or skydiving, and they put themselves in these dangerous situations, just to experience this thrill and this adrenaline rush that they couldn't get any other way, right? And they walk out of that feeling even more alive, often. And so in the same way, on a smaller scale, story allows us to feel alive, which is amazing. And so whether that's fear from a horror film, whether that's deep emotional, like a drama, for example, that stirs you up emotionally and brings you to tears, or whether it's, comedy, lighthearted, that makes you laugh from your, deeply from your heart. So whatever it is that you are in the mood for, and the way that we select genres, right, is really mood based. So, it's very similar to how we select genres of music, right? If you ask any average person, they don't have just one favorite genre. Most people have, they like sort of maybe 4 or 5 genres of music, and they'll alternate between them depending on how they feel and what they want to feel, actually, right? So if you're feeling down, you may want to listen to a few sad songs, ballads, love songs, whatever, right? And then eventually, when you kind of cry it out, get it out of your system, whatever it is that is upsetting you, you'll find yourself switching to upbeat music, right? Because now you're okay. You've gone through that process, that emotional process, that cleansing, if you will, and then you sort of come out of it like, okay, I just want to be uplifted, right? And so, or you'll seek out music that will uplift you when you're down, like whatever the case is, or classical music if you want to be in a certain mood. In the same way, we search out films and stories that satisfy that certain emotional need that we have, and that can deliver on that promise.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this up and down that we are in, sometimes, of course, I think the human being, I don't know whether sometimes we are just funny or we are strange, if we want to put it like that, in that, for example, when we go to the movie, you want to watch, I don't know, maybe Transformer or any other big film or even smaller film or narration, we go there knowing that these things are not real, but we still go there to just, like you said, don't just feel the emotion. And we go there happy. Not that we are stupid, not that we don't know that it is not real, but we still go there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something that is going back into several millennia, because this is what we have always done. The other day, I was talking with a storyteller. I was saying, a lot of things have changed in human history, in human evolution, if you want to put it like that. But something that have really changed is our storytelling. Mm-hmm. Right from the time that our ancestors could sit around the fire in the fire camp and listen to story till now, there is a huge impact story is making in us.
Yes.
So that psychologists and people who study the human behavior, they do a lot with this storytelling. Because what do psychologists do? Maybe, for example, in African psychology, you had a dream and you don't know what is the meaning of this dream. So you went to a soothsayer or somebody who is a diviner. This is the work, of course, the Western psychology will do anyway, and that you're having a feeling, you don't know what this means. Mm-hmm. You are going to engage in story. Like, tell me what happened. When you were feeling this, what did you do? This, and at the end of this narration, there's going to be a front and back interaction with you. Just tell a story. I don't know if animals do that. Maybe this is what is actually helping us to build this mega city that we have, because we are able to tell story, sort of lie to ourselves, frame and reframe things in a way that other animals don't do this. I don't think other animals do this. What is your take on that? This power is storytelling.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that story speaks to us as human beings like nothing else. So I think that, it's always been the way to, well, think about this. I mean, like you said, it's been going back millennia, right? So it's the earliest form of education, if you look at it that way, right? So before there was, books were even, before any of the stories were ever actually recorded, right? Before the Epic of Gilgamesh and the, stone tablets and all of that, before, certainly before schools and curriculums and classrooms and all of that was ever established, the way that information, the way that knowledge, the way that history, and the accomplishments in civilization, the heroes of war, and all these these were all recorded in stories, and they were told generation after generation. And this is how human history was communicated, passed on generation and generation down. So, and all of the information that was being gathered, right, about society at the time. And I mean, even down to the use of tools and different forms of knowledge were weaved into story, because that was the easiest way for us to remember, right? And for this information to be passed on into little fables, little what do you call these, like, what today would be considered fairy tales or fables, or these kind of like short stories that carry a moral, carry a message, right? And especially for children, this whole idea is that you'll find these little lessons learned, or action and consequence, understanding the relationship between action and consequence, cause and effect. So all of these important principles in life were codified, in a sense, in story. And so this is why it speaks to us. It speaks to us almost on a genetic level, like in our DNA, if you will, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think and that's why it's like we were able to comprehend things. The human mind is so intuitive and so able to get beyond the surface. And that's another thing in storytelling, is really appreciating the intelligence of your audience. I think that is
that is a key word there, the audience. And that actually leads me to where I'm trying to go with that, the analogy,
okay.
That you have done work in marketing, creative marketing content, promotional content. And in my understanding, there is a lot of psychology, a lot of storytelling that is going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And because these stories are very powerful, because now you're going to tell somebody, buy. Maybe somebody, the person might not necessarily really be interested in it, might not even know that what you are offering is available. But you are going to take the person on a journey. At the end of the day, say, yes, I need it. It's just like the basic concept of, look at the yellow. Up until that point, the person didn't realize there was a yellow in the multitude of colors that are around. He was seeing red and seeing blue. But now you tell the person, look at the yellow. Now the person just suddenly realized that it's yellow. But you didn't bring the yellow. The yellow have been there all along. So I try to understand, what is the role of storytelling in marketing? That is simply what I'm just going to ask you.
Okay. I should not have mentioned my background in marketing. Everyone wants to know, right? The business applications of story. Oh gosh. Okay. Well, the main, I mean, and even this idea of story in marketing is also quite a new phenomenon. This is really about, I would say, in the last maybe 15 years or so, that 10 or 15 years, that this has really been sort of really emphasized, or is really pushed in terms of the ability, the way to connect with your audience, right? The way to connect with your market, actually. And so, but the approach is different in terms of, it's really educating your audience, your market, right? Your target customer. It's sort of like provoking their pain point. This is how you could look at that. So trying to identify what their pain point is, where is their need, and then showing how your product or your service will address that need, will solve that problem for them, and then showing them the outcome of that, right? Which is, like, look at life now after you used our product or our service. And those are probably the three kind of key, I guess, steps in the process of how you would use story. So it isn't just raising awareness, I think, in the past, but it also depends on where you are in the life cycle of your brand or of your product, right? If you're in the early stages where you're building awareness, it's really about educating your customer about the need of your product or service. If you've already sort of reached market leader, status, then there's brand maintenance or sort of maintaining that position that has a different set of goals or different tactics that you would use. And you employ story kind of differently in each one of these areas. So again, it's looking at where you are in that life cycle and what your objectives are, how do you need to move your customer from kind of from the point of realizing that they have a need for your project, because that's what storytelling is in business. It's actually showing them that and in many cases it's almost making them realize it's that whole thing, like you said, the tie-in with psychology, is that it's not just, oh look, and not making them aware of your product. It's really making them aware of their need for your product or service, right? And how much they are in without it, how much difficulty they're in. You know what I mean? Right? And so like they could be fine, but it's your job to go in there and provoke them and show them like, well, actually, you think you're fine, but you're not. And you'd be a lot better if you had this whatever.
Yeah, you have this product.
Yeah.
All right, now Shina, say maybe for example you are going to train a team of marketer or people, of course, maybe businesses or who are going to use storytelling.
Yeah.
What would you tell them to lay emphasis on in terms of communicating their message to the audience, who by extension are going to be maybe the customers, so that they can buy? Because now we understand that this storytelling we are talking about is actually laced into our DNA, because this is where we are coming from. Mm-hmm. It tells us it goes far, far, farther than the 10,000 years ago. It goes back to, I look at the human being as having a record of a hard disk of our entire existence. That whatever happened, you are able to think back, you're able to connect, you're able to, all this collective consciousness, we are able to tap into it through story, because we have lived, of course, not us, I'm only be existing for the last 43 years, but I have a generation, I have father's father. All these people have a story, and that story happened to be part of me. I am part of it, so I can tap into it. And because this is the way it is, at the psychology or at the psychological level, we're able to tap into that. What would you say is the most important thing to lay emphasis on or to concentrate on so that they will be able to sell their product?
Okay, I have to be honest in saying that it's been a lot of years since I left marketing, right? It's been like 15 years and I have that has not been my area of sort of expertise over the last 15 years. I've really been focusing on kind of these internal principles of story that you're talking about, right? And really mastering that craft. And so the connections with business, I'm actually in the process of connecting those dots now, to be honest. I've kind of moving back to Canada. I've had to sort of buckle down and get my head back into business. Although it was not a choice, it was more of a necessity. So
okay.
to be honest, I'm making those connections now, and I will hopefully have an answer for you in that area soon. But what I can say in regard to what you were saying about this collective consciousness, and which is beautiful, which is so true. And one of the things that I think has always been my reason for why I've loved stories so much, and sort of this motivating factor for me to keep learning and keep digging deeper and understanding, is because it is such a reflection of life, even in the present moment. So you were talking about the fact that it is a collection of kind of like all the wisdom of humanity, in a sense, right? And it is this collective consciousness that we can tap into, which is absolutely true. But one of the things that always amazed me about story is that it is also a direct reflection of life, day to day, like our world around us right now, in the here and now, and understanding. And I know that one of the greatest books I ever read that helped me understand. And I'd read at this point, I'd read a lot of books on psychology and sociology and philosophy. That was a big, interest of mine for a long time. Uh, and yet it was a book on story, this book called Story by Robert McKee, that was one of the most eye-opening kind of, it was almost like a manual of how life works, and I remember reading that book, and it's a very deep, sort of academic uh, analysis of story, a very big, epic, sort of what do you call it, uh, like a tome, but it is it is something that I will, and Robert McKee's work is probably the foundation of upon which I own my knowledge and teach from that. Saying that the story that there, for example, there's things in there that he talks about, and these connections between, so when you think that you're, for example, taking a character on a journey through a story, and all these obstacles are happening to your character, and it's just a tactic that we use as storytellers to make the story interesting, whereas he draws these parallels between life and says that's not coincidental. That's not just, it's not just a plot device or a narrative, technique that's going to help keep your audience engaged. It's like, broaden your scope and understand that story is a reflection of life. And so for example, one of the great things that, he talks about is this gap that opens up between expectation and result often, right? And so when we set out to do something, right, we put a plan in our mind, and we think, okay, we're gonna take this course of action because we're gonna end up with this result, right? And this happens to everyone all the time, right? You set out to do what you say you're gonna do with this expectation you're gonna have this particular result, and suddenly it goes sideways, right? And you're like, what just happened? And you're now dealing with this huge, it's like the ground just opened up, and there's a huge chasm between you and your expected result, what you thought was going to be, what was going to happen. And it's this constant, having to recalibrate in life, and having to rethink, and it's like Google Maps having to constantly reroute, right, if you take a wrong turn. And recalibrate directions, and that's life, that is so it's this mirroring, and this is why we connect the story so well, is because when we see these characters experience this on the screen, we identify with that, because this happens to us all the time, right? And yeah, even with best intentions, we end up often, in this space between, it's like, what happened? Like, this is not what I thought was going to happen, right? But out of that, oftentimes, so it causes us to recalibrate, it causes us to rethink, replan, come up with a new course of action, change direction, right? And we set out again. And because that's one of the beautiful things about human beings, is that we don't stop, right? And we at least an active protagonist in your life, right? In your own life story, as an active protagonist, you hopefully keep going, and you don't let these unexpected interruptions hold you back and keep you from your destiny, really, right? So you recalibrate, you take another step, and uh, so in that process, you've learned something now, and you've gained something now, and you're wiser, and you're better for it, and you're stronger for it, right? And so the next course of action you'll see a certain amount of success, a certain amount of but you're again going to hit a wall somewhere, right? And you're again going to end up in that same situation, and that's just life, and that's okay, and that's the way. This is how we grow, and this is how we, so by the time we get to the end of this race, hopefully we will have impacted people along the way in a positive way, right? Like, if I look at what you're doing, Obehi, right? You're surely this couldn't, just arranging this time with me today was a challenge for you. So surely this is there are always hiccups along the way, and which I do apologize for, by the way. But I, so, but the fact that you keep persevering, and in the end you're creating content that is impacting people, that is creating a ripple effect in this world, right? And so even with the challenges, you're still able to do great things, right? All of us are. And I think that that's the whole journey. And so story for me is just a reflection of, or a mirroring of this crazy journey that we're all on called life, right?
I think there is a lot we can actually do about story, because it is really powerful. I think one Israeli writer, I think is Harari, who wrote the 21 Lesson of the Century, it did say that one thing that actually separates human being from other animals is a story that we tell ourselves. Because these stories are very powerful. And if you read the book of James Allen too, I think, what is the name of this book? As a Man Thinketh, that is the title of the book. James Allen also said that artists are the maker of the other world. Of course, by the other world is referring to heaven, for example. Because heaven, these are things that we create. We create them out of our imagination, out of our experiences, things that we think are there, or think that should be there, or think that shouldn't be there. But we imagine it. Because we imagine it, we put it there. It is real for us. This is an extraordinary capacity that we have as human beings to tell story, whether it is real or imagined. And we listen in an emotion that just by listening, you can start crying. You just by listening to another one, you start laughing. How do we do this? So there is really a huge power in story.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think.
Yeah.
But how does someone really master this art now? Because it's not everybody that know how to do it the right way. That is why not everybody will be able to sell. Because you don't know how to touch the point in the human consciousness to make them respond to you. Because communication, they say, is in the response. Because if you just keep talking, at the end of the day, the person didn't understand what you said, you haven't communicated.
True.
So how do you master the art of storytelling? That is where I'm asking your help.
Mastering story is like mastering any other artistic discipline or any discipline in life, actually, right? It just takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of actual writing. You get better and better as you do. And as I was saying, before the system crashed, that every single artistic field, every artistic form is built on a science. So and if you want to really excel in any art form or any scientific field, right? It really takes the knowledge. So learning the technicalities of writing is really important. There's no other way to master the craft. I've worked with writers who are, the ones who just write instinctively. And like, I came to writing, like I was saying, very late in life. I was 35, and I kind of feel like I taught myself how to write in a sense, because I came to it through producing. And while producing, I was creative producing. I was working with writers, and I was always fascinated by their ability to just, how do they do this? How do they just create like this? And oh God, I wish I knew. And I started reading, and plus I had been reading a lot about story, to in order to work, to be able to work with these writers and to be able to craft these stories. And so I learned all the technical aspects, right? And then it became an obsession of mine to learn how to apply it. And that's where the writing aspect then developed, right? But there are people who are naturally gifted and they're writing since they're young, since they're in school. And they do it almost instinctively. Like you said, it's that in our DNA kind of, talent or natural ability. For them, it's like the last thing they want to hear is that I have to learn the rules of writing, and that's not something that they enjoy often. And they'll come to it kind of grudgingly, right? And but they'll come to it at some point or another. They have to, because there's no other option. I mean, when it comes to, because you need to know that stuff for rewriting, and real writing happens in the rewriting, and in the process of sort of almost tearing down your first draft and reconstructing it, right? And it's that process of constantly those iterations, which make story better. So understanding where those problems are in your story and how to fix them, right? That takes technical knowledge. And yeah, so that's where you can't avoid that. That's unavoidable.
Now, there is another thing that I see that always work is the emotion in story. What do you want to say about the role of emotion in the story that we tell?
Emotion can be elicited in different ways, and it depends on the emotion that you're trying to elicit, first of all, right? And how you go about doing that. But okay, so let's break this down into a couple parts here. First of all, I think the strongest emotion comes out of choice, right? So when you put in your character, even in a TV commercial, for example, right? Or, I'm not just talking about a feature film here, but so whatever, this person, but for the sake of this, let's talk about like a feature film or a television series, right? So you have a character who is presented with a complex choice. And so remember when I mentioned before about philosophical conflict? So you have when you're starting to build your idea, right, your concept, you start with the theme, and then you've got to have your philosophical conflict come in at a very early stage. This is sort of like the what is the dilemma in the world in this character, right, that they're going to be faced with. And so meaning or sorry, emotion comes from meaning, and meaning comes from putting your character into these difficult choices and having them. And as a character chooses, this is another thing, this is a character development thing, by the way, is that as our characters choose, we as an audience understand who they are at a deeper and deeper level as the story progresses with every single choice they make, right? So it's a lot more, because again, that's a reflection of life, right? We only come to know one another really, and if you think about it, like for example, whether it's family members, whether it's friends that you've grown up with, over time, you've come to understand the character of a person based on the choices that they make, right? And that as a person makes makes certain, for example, the choice of whether to be stingy or generous with their money, the choice of whether to be ethical in a business transaction or to take shortcuts, right? The choice of being, if they have a bit of information that could benefit someone, would they keep that information to themselves because it could benefit themselves and not share that with other people? Do you know what I mean? Like there's so many choices that we're presented with choices every day. If you think about it, like we're, moral and ethical, choices are something that face us every day. And as we make these choices, we then, it opens up to different consequences in our lives. And this is why it hits home, and it really evokes emotion very, very easily, I would say, and quickly, because when you put your character in this situation and they have to make a choice. Now, let's back up a little bit and explain that it's important, first of all, to create a connection between your audience and that character, right? Before you thrust them into these choices, right? Your audience has to first connect with that character, identify with that character, and empathize with that character, right? And to be able to see themselves to some degree in that character. And that always takes place in usually some kind of a setup, right? Where you establish that in the beginning when you're revealing your character and you're building up the world around them, and you're sort of presenting your character to your audience for the first time. And then you start to get into step by step, putting them into situations where they have to make these choices. And this is where now once your audience is connected to your character, and this connection has been established, whatever your character is doing in terms of whatever choice they have to make, right? Your audience is going to feel that along with them. And as they go step by step through these processes, and again, going back to also what I said about the gap that opens up between expectation and result, right? So now when your audience is connected with that character and they're identified with them and they make that choice, that the audience, most cases will support because they understand the motivation behind it, right? And why they had to make this choice. So they're hoping for the best just as much as your protagonist is hoping for the best, right?
So in a way, you are taking them in a journey.
Yes, it's absolutely a journey. Yeah, and step by step, right? So then when that character, makes that choice, but then hits a wall, right, or that gap opens up, they feel it intrinsically because they've been able to put their themselves in that character's shoes, right? And so every time they hit that obstacle, they hit that wall, your audience feels it as though it's happening to them, right? And another thing that's really important is so I've been building this. I'm working on a series of master classes right now. One of them, the first one, is actually philosophical conflict. These are sort of the keys to universal and timeless storytelling. This is the masterclass series, and the second one is the hierarchy of fear. So it's important to take your audience, your character, through their deepest fear, have them overcome it, and like sort of triumph over it in order to give your audience that real feeling of satisfaction. So this is something that I kind of, well, I don't have time to break it all down here, but again, ascribing certain fears to your character, right? So for example, if it's a fear of height, okay, different characters, you make sure you give them different fears, and then part of the process of writing is taking your character and putting them face to face with their ultimate fear, right? Making them almost in a life or death situation, like which they call raising the stakes. So you put them in a situation where they have no choice but to face that fear and to have to act in the face of that fear, have to make a decision and make a choice and take some kind of an action, even though they've been confronted by this fear of theirs, right? And it's when you take them through it and have them triumph over it that also gives that's another way of really stirring up the emotion of your audience and having them feel. And so again, they'll feel that sense of triumph, right? Because your character, they've seen that character go from deathly terrified of this particular thing, and then having to confront it head on, and in the face of that, having being able to triumph gives your audience that sense of triumph as well, along with your character, which is a hugely satisfying experience for your audience.
Thank you so much for that. That's really very important.
Yeah.
In fact, I was going to ask you to say something about character development, because that is very important. Whether you are looking at a pure story or story for marketing, it's going to be very important because, like you said, you are going to make this connection between the audience and the character. Because if the audience do not fall in love with the character, they don't care about the character. Therefore, they don't care about the story.
Exactly.
Because how are we going to know the story if not through the eyes of the character? And this character, they're in your hands. You are the one creating it. And like Alan says, you are the creator of the other word. People don't know that word. Only you know the word. So
yes.
What do you want to say about the choice of character that we use in the kind of story that we tell? In this case, your story. What influences your choice of character in the story that you create?
Well, I think it boils down to what I mentioned before about the fact that we you have to ask yourself, why are you telling this story? And why is it important to you? And why does it need to be told now in this way? Like, so and every person's why is different. And out of that grows your it's interesting because when you start to ask yourself these questions, now it can come in different forms. So for example, I'll give you an example from my project, right? When I this particular animation project that I was telling you that I've been working on, it actually started as a television series, an animated television series for adults. And the idea came with a cast of characters, an ensemble cast of characters. And as time went on and I started to look at this more, I realized that I think it works better as a feature film. And so I had to identify one particular character that would be the main character. Because in a feature film, you really want one single protagonist driving the film, driving the story. And I had to go through this process of asking myself, okay, so wait a minute, if this is a single character story as opposed to an ensemble cast of characters, right, in their story, then which one am I going to choose and why, right? And why is it important to tell? Because even though, for example, they're in a shared location, right, but every person's experience of that is going to be different, right? So if you think about, for example, even in a home, in a single location within a family, for example, right, brothers and sisters can often come out of the same environment with very different viewpoints as to what that family home environment was like, right, and what that childhood was like, and what that and they also grew up with very different personalities, right, even though the original place was the same, like their home environment was the same. So in any given experience, so even like, so for example, in an office, same thing. You have all these people coming in every day to work, for example, in this company with a common goal and a common purpose, and even a shared space. But everybody has a different experience and a different reality in many cases that they would, not only in what they bring to the table, but in how they perceive this environment and how they perceive this experience, right? So it was really kind of isolating. Okay, like, so whose perspective do I want to tell this story from? And that's really, and that again, like I said, it's tied to the why. It's tied to the theme of the story. It's tied to the message. Like, what is it that you want to tell? What do you want to say in this story? And who is the best? Which character is the best to be the driving force of this message? And I think that if it's a point where it doesn't come naturally, where you don't automatically, instinctively from the get-go, you don't see a single character, but you have to decide on who your character should be, then take it through a process of questioning. And I would say the most important thing is to tie it to the theme, the philosophical conflict, the things that are grounding your concept. And the best question to ask is whose perspective does the story need to be told through? And that's how I think you start to create a really great framework for your protagonist, for your main character.
Thank you so much for that. That's really interesting. Very, very interesting. All right. Now, when you take up a story, because as a story creator, as a story writer, you have worked in different dimensions of story, because story, of course, they are of different formats, different style. You have written text, you have video, you have audio. You have seen a great part of all of it, because you work in an advertising agency where you have worked with video, television. Mm-hmm. And so you are really in a good position to be able to talk about any type of story and look at story from 360 degrees, which is what I found very interesting. So I say that because I'm going to ask you to help me explain What for you is a good story? When you take this story and say, this is a good story, what does that mean for you?
Okay, good. Your questions are all very good, very probing. um, okay, so again, I think it comes down to a meaningful story, one that is rich with a philosophical conflict, and I think that one of the things that okay, let me put it this way, what a bad story is, right? Let's start with that. I think that a story that doesn't respect an audience's time, in terms of, like if I'm going to give you 2 hours of my life and watch this film and I come away with nothing, not having learned anything, not having experienced anything, not having seen the world from a different perspective, not having understood a different culture, anything. There's so many things that we can do with story, right? It can serve so many purposes. But if I come away from this experience not having gained anything, then I feel like you wasted my time, and that to me is just, there's nothing worse than that, right? So it's I think that when we in order to respect your audience's time, right, and to value them, right, you have to give them something worthwhile, right? And so and it can even be as basic as just entertainment value, right? Like, so for example, if some people just need to be entertained, which is a very valid need also. It's not that, not to undermine that, because that's a very common sort of Hollywood, what do you want to call it? Like a kind of their driving,
Driving force, something like that,
the
of
driving
course.
force, yeah, entertainment, and that has some value in itself. Like, it's not that it's completely void of anything, right? Again, going back to people who are, extreme sports, or any kind of, they're looking for, that's a high entertainment value activity, right? So that has its own place. But if you're asking me personally, I think the greatest stories are the ones that uh, that I learn from, and that open my eyes really to, um, another world. And um, they're like gateways into different people's experiences that I don't have the privilege of meeting face to face. You know what I mean? Like, I've been so fortunate that I've been able to travel a little bit, and I've met a lot of people, and there's nothing that I love more than interacting with different people and hearing their stories. A lot like you, Obehi, I think you have this fascination with people. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you're not fascinated by people and their stories and their journeys. And I'm a lot like that. And so for me, a good film is a film that allows me to do that. It's to have this perspective. Like, one of my favorite films of all time is and it's funny, it still hasn't shifted. It's City of God, the Brazilian film. I don't know if you've ever seen this. I think it was 2003 that it came out, and it's about, these street kids in Brazil, and this whole kind of life, this underworld, um, and it's a beautiful, poignant. But there's so many examples of these films that are these windows into different communities, different cultures, different, ideas, uh, ways of living, lifestyles, whatever, you name it, right? And I think that that's one of the greatest things that the story can give us, is just access, really, to understanding people and life at a much deeper level.
Thank you so much for that. That's interesting. Because we're looking at it from your perspective, from your point of view. As you will see written under here, everyone has a story to share, and we really believe that to be true. That your point of view is very important. You help us to see what we cannot see.
Right.
That is
right.
why it is very beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. Now, as you were learning to climb in the ladder of storytelling, was there somebody you learned from? Are there people who inspired you in terms of storytelling? It could be book, it could be movie, it could be just oral narration. Who are these kind of people? Who are they, and what did you like about them, if any?
Wow. Um, from a, I guess in different disciplines, you could say that there are different people that I admire. So if you look at, I mean, I just this name is coming to the top of my mind, but Mitch Albom, I think I've read every one of his books. Uh, he he writes these incredibly moving stories. You might have heard of Tuesdays with Maury, and they're kind of like half. They're not all fiction. He's only written a few. It's kind of these memoirs, sort of these type, you know, but very emotional, and very stirring, very poignant, like very deep. Also, deep reflections on life. The Five People You Meet in Heaven. I'm just trying to think of all of his books, but the so I think he's had a big impact or influence on me. Um, in feature film, I think that Christopher Nolan is someone that I admire because I think that his, again, very deep, cerebral, kind of, philosophical, explores areas that a lot of other filmmakers don't sort of venture into. Sometimes a little bit over complex. It's getting to be a little bit too complex, maybe unnecessarily, but certainly when he started, it was he kind of opened this new gateway to storytelling that was really it was connecting the dots between emotion and intellect, and I think that was really exciting. Um, And then television series, God, Vince Gilligan, Breaking Bad, an incredible writer. The writer of, I'm forgetting the creator of Ozark, what his name is. The series, I don't know if you've seen that series on Netflix. Also, but then there's writers like, I'm thinking Margaret Atwood. She had a profound impact on me, growing up, since because we studied her in school, and her work is also incredibly, so much foresight, so much, um, you know, that that very, George Orwell. It's the same style. It's that kind of commentary, political and social commentary, but done uh, in a very creative way. I think that I've always gravitated towards that sort of material. Um, who else?
Oh,
Um,
you have read a lot, so of course you are not going to be able to list all of them out
yeah,
today.
yeah.
I know, but you're looking for the one that inspire you more. Those are.
The Pixar. I would have to say also Pixar is a huge. I do have to do a shout out to them. They are like hugely impacted my. I know that they're seen as, it's animation. It's seen as children, but trust me, that's not only for children. They have these incredibly impactful stories. They're master storytellers, and I think they've been a huge influence as well.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Shina. Thank you so much for that. All right, now how can people connect with you? Because we know that you have a business where people can benefit from. Why don't you use these few seconds to promote yourself? Tell people how to reach you and perhaps what they can get from you. Please go ahead and do that.
Thank you. At the moment, the best way to reach me would be through LinkedIn. Shina Ahmed is I mean, you could just search that, my name. And I am in the process of building my website and sort of getting those initial building blocks in place. Uh, yeah, if there's any questions or anything that any way I can be of service, the best way would be to like I said, LinkedIn. You could email me directly as well. It's Shina, SHINA dot Ahmed, AHMAD at gmail.com. I am based in Vancouver, but thanks to technology, I can work remotely as well with anyone, anywhere. I have, as I mentioned, I have this workshop called the Writer's Room Experience. This is intended for individual writers to give them the opportunity to know themselves better. Basically, that is the whole objective, is to be able to save yourself. Hopefully, if this can save even one person from the years of agony that I went through, and the struggle until I discovered this, it would be, it'd make that journey worthwhile for me. And really, the hope is to save someone years of their life and potentially great expense, to understand whether they are solo writers or they are collaborative writers. And that's really important for being able to choose the right track, and to get you on the right track, and to be able to save time. Really, that's what it comes down to: save years of your life, and also to put you in an environment in which you're going to thrive from an earlier stage. So you actually get to enjoy the process and not just be, this idea. It shouldn't have to be what I think it was Hemingway that said, "Oh, writing is easy. You just sit at the typewriter and bleed." It doesn't have to be that way. I promise you. So yeah, so poor Hemingway. I think he needed a collaborative environment, and it would have been a lot easier for him. So that's the individual process. But I also have a very specific skill set, which is that I've worked with television stations and production companies in Dubai, and helping them really transition from service providers to original content creators. So when Netflix first came into the Middle East, this was around 2016, there was this big, suddenly this desire and this awareness that, okay, we need to start transitioning from just producing, like I said, TV commercials and corporate videos and all that, or servicing productions that were coming to the region, and transitioning into original content creators ourselves. And so I created this kind of like a 3-week, let's say, boot camp, where it is a story development boot camp, and it was really priming and preparing the writers for a lead writer to come in and then take over, only because I don't speak Arabic, unfortunately, but it was preparing these writers for a lead writer, an Arabic writer, to come in and be able to lead these teams. And so I would lay all the groundwork, sort of go through story boot camp, because it's quite different. A lot of these, in the television station, there was an existing writing team, but most of them were writing for sort of daily magazine style shows, writing, presenter pitches and or the little blurbs that the presenters say, and a lot of just kind of on the fly, day to day, the things that were going on air. And it was a real transition. It was a real sort of a steep learning curve for them to be able to understand fictional writing or story, narrated, scripted writing, and preparing them for that. And they loved the process, and they were all like excited to be able to use, because they all originally had that passion for writing fiction. And so this was a great way to sort of rekindle that. But anyway, so that boot camp idea is very successful, and I've been able to people take that. So these are the two things. So one is for individuals, the writer's room experience, and the other one is for companies, for production companies and television stations, to make that transition. And that's for teams, for writing teams.
Thank you so much for that. So as you can see, Shina has a lot of experience you can benefit from. So why not reach out to her, and you are on a good hands, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, so you're welcome. So what would be your concluding thought regarding the conversation that we have had today, looking at storytelling and a bit of marketing we also talked about, but mainly we have remained in storytelling. So what would you say is your final thought? It can be a message, it can be because you want to advise somebody, whatever it is your time.
Wow. Okay. First of all, nothing brings me greater joy than meeting other people who are interested in story and writing and storytelling, even if it's from a marketing point of view. And I would just say that, if this is an interest, if this is a passion, that don't be discouraged. Don't let it, it's a long, hard road, I'll be honest, but it is so rewarding and it is so satisfying. And when you start to see the fruits of the labor and you start to see the the response to your work, because really it is a very personal expression of oneself, right? And when you start to see the world respond to it in a positive way, it's like it comes full circle, and you will begin to understand that everything you've learned and not only that, but the journey itself is so enthralling because, like I was telling you, this whole idea of the mirroring between life and story. And as we understand life better, you understand story better. And as you understand story better, you understand life better, right? So it's this beautiful interaction, I think. And that for, my greatest, I would say, piece of advice for anyone interested in storytelling is like live life literally. And as the more you live life and the more you experience, that's the stuff that story is made from, and it's drawing from those life experiences, excuse me, and it's drawing um from that knowledge and that experience and bringing it into story is what makes story that much more impactful. So, I've had a little bit of an unconventional career path, to be honest. Once I left the corporate ladder and I left, marketing, it's really been uh, this sort of journey that I've taken in with a lot of detours, you know. Uh, and for a long time, it was quite unsettling to me that there was, because I was in a place where with no established industry, and they're like I couldn't just get into a company and climb a ladder, and there was no way for me to learn story, in a structured way, and I had to learn it on my own, all through all like my own initiative. But now I look back and I think, my gosh, I'm so glad I did, because I probably have gone further than people who have just gone through a structured program. I've had to push myself further. But at the same time, it's been this integration of life experiences along the way, and the kind of the juice of that, if you squeeze out the juice of that, and that's what just makes it so much more meaningful and worthwhile, really, right? So it's tying those two things together. And it doesn't matter what age either. And I think that almost I would have to say that um, being a little bit older can actually add something far more valuable to your writing. So never be afraid of your like, it being too late to start writing, or to be, interested in storytelling. Um, you your life experience is going to compensate for, that's going to bring depth to your characters. That's going to bring realism to the world that you're creating. There's so much value that it adds. So just whatever it is, go for it. I'm a big believer in story. I just love it so much, and I think that it's funny because it's something that transforms you in the process. You know, it's one of those pursuits that I think it forces us as storytellers. It forces us to rise up to meet the challenges of telling a great story, right? And so it's a very it's I almost think that it's an evolutionary tool. It's what propels us, or what drives us to be better human beings in pursuit of understanding story. I think that also that has opened up so much in terms of the pursuit of knowledge in so many aspects of life. And all of that, it like I would start because I'm trying to understand, for example, my character better, right? And then, but it'll take me down this path of reading, books on psychology and books on, philosophy. And so it's amazing how much it adds to you and your knowledge and your wisdom even though you start with something small, a small intention, and it will end up leading you down this path where it adds so much, you know? So yeah, it's just, it's a beautiful journey.
Thank you so much, Shina. It really have been really valuable here. The conversation is so valuable. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It's been so much fun. I love talking with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Obehi.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewanfo. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.